Hey everybody, Professor Snart checking in really quickly here, more just to say hi than anything else. We're a little bit past midterm in our 5-week semester, which is hard to believe, honestly. And it's really kind of funny for a creative writing class where, unlike another kind of maybe like information-based type of class, you can really look back on work that you've done or weeks that we've spent like in class, so to speak. And think, oh, I covered like history from 1800 to 1850 or something like that. This really discrete, like sort of collection of things that you've studied and learned. Whereas for us, it's you sort of get introduced to some ideas, the opportunity to practice them a little bit. But I mean, it would be great if right now you could say, oh, I'm definitively a better writer now than I was like 2.5 weeks ago, way back when. But more than likely, you might have learned some new things or have new ideas to try or even experienced the workshop that might have been new to you. But it's often the case that writing is just something that unfolds as a skill so much more slowly, which is part of what makes it frustrating for a lot of people, I know. But it is, a useful time to really think about like what are you trying to learn here. And again, if you want to review the rules of creative writing, PowerPoint, or some of the how the workshops work information, or even some like glance through our list of units and just think about sort of what we've done. Again, not to put too fine a point on it, but it's useful to think about what you're learning in a course like this, but also to realize that it might be like a year from now before a strategy that we've talked about really kind of the light bulb goes off, or you actually see it not just in theory, right, but actually in a piece of writing that you're working on. So again, that's part of why we don't do a lot of grading of the writing itself. It just doesn't happen that fast. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me anyway to expect people to be great writers either at the start of the course, and then why would you take like an intro to creative writing, or even now where we've done all of like 2 weeks worth of work. I mean, it just doesn't add up that way. So anyway, hopefully the course has been interesting. You've done some writing that you feel has been maybe in a genre or a style or a type of exercise that you wouldn't necessarily have done. And hopefully you do get the sense that I'm accessible. So if you have particular questions about like an idea from the course or a piece of writing that you're working on, even if it's not for our course per se, I'd be more than happy to talk with you about that. So you can be in touch with me, and we can, if you want to just email me, I find it works best to do like a real-time discussion of those kinds of things. But even if we can't do it face-to-face, we can always connect virtually. There's tons of different ways that we can do that. So just want to make sure that everybody knows that option is always out there. And again, hoping that you're keeping on track for our course as we get, again, past the midterm point. So we've done our first workshop, the fiction workshop. We are just finishing up, as I record this, the Elements of NonFiction / This I Believe discussion board, which is an interesting assignment, partly because I like the way it connects to this real-world kind of writing entity, the This I Believe series. So we're not tapping into it directly. We're certainly not submitting to it, although you could. I mean, it's open if you want. But we're not doing it officially for this course. But it's nice to think about what you're producing for this course as actually having kind of a home or its genesis in this nationally, internationally known writing entity or storytelling entity or kind of expression of personal philosophy. Is sort of a cool thing, I think. And then that gets us turned around to our next workshop, which is Unit 8, the Creative Nonfiction. The posting due date then is Monday, June 15th. The feedback due date is Wednesday, June 17th. And again, in some ways, defining this as creative nonfiction is just kind of an organizational benefit for our course. So we think about fiction, then creative nonfiction, then we'll move to poetry. Like it's just a way of kind of dividing things up on some level. So you don't need to get too hung up on what's the exact definition of creative nonfiction from fiction and questions like that. Honestly, the more you think about it,
the grayer the area can get between the two. So creative nonfiction is basically the idea of taking true experience for you, something that has actually more or less happened to you, but then presenting it in a way that is interesting to somebody else, not just because it's this earth-shattering event or this really traumatic event, but because you've used language in an interesting way or suggested the kind of larger symbolism or larger import of the event. And that you can see is how it's connected to Unit 7 as kind of a build-up unit where you're taking a kind of belief of yours and maybe connecting it to some individual incidents in your life, but providing this larger kind of framework or larger meaning to it. So it's a really great kind of a pathway into creative nonfiction. So the example I like to use for creative nonfiction, people always ask, does it have to be like literally absolutely true? No detail can be altered. Well, not exactly. But for the most part, the general outline of the events should be true, should be something you actually experienced firsthand, not just you heard a story about something. So if you were telling the story, let's say, of a pet's death or whatever, right? So it's intrinsically meaningful for you personally, but I'm kind of sorry that your goldfish died, but I'm not like super interested to read your essay about it necessarily, right? Some reader from around the globe somewhere, why would they care about your pet's death? I know it sounds harsh, but I don't mean it that way. So it happened on a Tuesday. Well, Tuesday is kind of a generic day. It could be Monday, Wednesday, it doesn't matter. But Sunday, right, if you change the day of that a little bit, so I'm not saying that instead of the goldfish it was actually my grandmother that died. That would be fiction, not creative nonfiction. But if I change the date a little bit, if it was a bright sunny day, but I change it so it's a little overcast, that's a little bit more interesting. It fudges the truth a little bit. It doesn't really change the fundamental thing that's happening, but it gives it a little more symbolism, right? It's dark and stormy on this dark and stormy moment. It's Sunday, which has this sort of religious connotation to it. Maybe we've just come from church, blah, blah, blah. You notice that you can manipulate certain details like that. The best case scenario is where you don't really have to manipulate or change the facts like that, but you choose which facts to talk about in the story, and that's what gives it import. That's what gives it meaning for a reader who's not you or your best friend, who also loved the goldfish and thus really cares deeply about it. So, like I said, the more you try to parse it out exactly, the more gray area you're going to see between fiction and creative nonfiction. But I think it does have some kind of intrinsic qualities of its own that's important for us to focus on, not just so you learn the genre, but so that you're able to kind of attend to certain things that happen as a creative writer, regardless of what the genre is. One of the benefits, I think, of the creative nonfiction genre workshop here, or assignment, is that it sort of forces people away from what they will often gravitate towards, is writing about, like, they don't sort of trust their own experience or the world that they live in is interesting enough to talk about for fiction when it truthfully is, right? You have to have confidence that it is. And so we end up gravitating to sort of sci-fi, fantasy stuff or genre fiction like that, where there's like the narrative depends on, in the worst case scenario, because it doesn't have a good story in and of itself, it depends on these sort of fantastical elements to make it so-called interesting. So there has to be a zombie, because otherwise there's really nothing interesting going on in the story. That's the, like, again, theoretical, the worst case scenario, but clearly you can't do that in creative nonfiction, right? That goldfish doesn't come back to life, I hope, okay? So, reminders then, if you're interested in talking with me directly about your work, by all means be in touch, and I hope you are enjoying the course as we get really further towards the end than the beginning. All right, talk to you soon.